My 7-year-old daughter's tears were still soaking into the fabric of my shoulder as I opened my secure banking application. 15 years of my silent financial support, the very foundation keeping my family afloat, was about to end with a single screen tap. They were standing under crystal chandeliers, raising their glasses in a toast to their own manufactured success, completely unaware that their supply was officially cut. Their legacy was lost the moment they made my little girl cry. I am Jada, 35 years old, and for my entire life, I was the designated shadow in a family obsessed with the spotlight. As the quiet founder of a massive supply chain logistics firm, I built my empire far away from their toxic expectations. Yet I still showed up when summoned, playing the dutiful daughter for the sake of peace. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to quietly dismantle the power of a family who mistook your silence for weakness. The setting was my family's grand 40th business anniversary gala, held at the most exclusive ballroom in the city. Growing up, our house was a museum of appearances. Every achievement was measured by how it looked to the neighbors, the church congregation, and the local high society magazines. Tonight was the ultimate showcase of their supposed excellence. The room was draped in gold and ivory silk. A live jazz quartet played softly in the corner, drowned out by the clinking of champagne flutes and the loud, boastful laughter of politicians, investors, and socialites. My mother, Vivian, orchestrated the entire evening. She wore a custom beaded gown, floating through the crowd, making sure every photographer captured her perfect angles. For her, this event was not about celebrating a true business milestone. It was about proving to the city elite that our family was the epitome of flawless, self-made success. The truth, of course, was much darker. Their lifestyle brand had been bleeding money for a decade, propped up solely by an anonymous proxy trust fund. A trust fund that I secretly replenished every single month with the profits from my logistics company. I had played my part and kept her secrets, hoping to one day earn the motherly affection I had always craved. I had brought my daughter Zuri to the event. She was 7 years old, full of bright, uncontainable joy. For the occasion, I let her pick out her own outfit. She chose a vibrant yellow tulle dress that matched her glowing energy, and I styled her thick, beautiful natural hair into puffballs adorned with small gold cuffs. To me, she looked like a princess. To my mother, she looked like a liability. We were seated near the front at the VIP family table, right in the line of sight of the stage and the main camera crews. Zuri was giggling, reaching for a piece of bread, completely innocent and happy. Suddenly, the air shifted. I felt my mother approach before I even saw her. The faint smell of her expensive floral perfume signaled her arrival. Vivian leaned down, her face tight with a forced, terrifying smile meant only for the cameras, but her grip on Zuri's small arm was entirely real. She squeezed hard enough to make Zuri gasp and dropped the piece of bread back onto the pristine white tablecloth. "What are you doing?" My mother hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, designed to slide right under the jazz music. "I told you to make sure she looked presentable tonight, Jada. Look at her hair. Look at this loud dress. You are ruining the aesthetic of the entire front row. The magazine photographer is making his rounds, and you two simply do not fit the image we are projecting tonight. Go find another table in the back. Now." The people sitting next to us, wealthy associates of my parents, awkwardly looked down at their plates, pretending not to hear the blatant humiliation. The silence at our section of the table was deafening. Zuri looked up at me, her big brown eyes instantly welling with tears. Her lower lip began to tremble as she reached over with her other hand to rub the arm her grandmother had just grabbed and released. In the past, the old Jada would have felt a surge of hot, desperate shame. I would have argued, softly begged for our place at the table, or grabbed my purse and run to the bathroom to cry about being rejected yet again. I would have internalized the belief that I was not polished enough, not wealthy enough, not good enough to sit beside my own mother. But standing there in that opulent ballroom, looking down at my innocent child fighting back tears, my internal temperature simply dropped to absolute zero. I did not scream. I did not cause a scene. I did not give them the angry reaction they expected, so they could label me as the erratic, jealous daughter. Instead, I analyzed the board. I looked at Vivian taking in her desperate need for validation, her cruel vanity, and the fragile house of cards she was proudly standing on. I saw the rented centerpieces, the leased luxury cars waiting at the valet, and the catering staff that I was secretly paying for. She was a queen ruling over a kingdom made of dust. I gently took Zura's hand, standing up from the table with perfect posture. "Come on, baby girl," I said softly, ensuring my voice was completely steady and comforting. "We are going to find a much better spot." I led my daughter away from the flashing cameras and the suffocating pressure of the VIP section. We walked past the staring guests all the way to a dimly lit overflow table near the swinging kitchen doors. It was a table meant for staff on their breaks, far removed from the glamour of the evening. As I sat Zuri down and wiped her tears with a stiff linen napkin promising her a massive ice cream sundae, the absolute second we left this building, a profound clarity washed over me. For years, I had been the family workhorse. I built my massive company from the ground up in cold warehouses and endless board meetings while they paraded around in designer clothes funded by my silent charity. I had accepted their dismissive remarks and their condescending attitudes because I thought family meant enduring the pain for the greater good. But watching my mother glide up to the stage to begin her keynote speech, bathed in a spotlight she did not pay for, I realized the absolute truth. I no longer wanted a seat at her table. I was the one keeping the lights on in her entire world. The guilt holding me hostage evaporated, replaced by a cold, precise focus. I pulled my phone from my clutch, opened my banking portal, and prepared to show them exactly what happens when the shadow finally decides to turn off the sun. Before I could even take a single step away from the VIP table, a broad shoulder in a custom-tailored Italian suit deliberately blocked my path. It was Trent, my sister Kendra's husband. He stood there with a crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand, the ice clinking softly as he shifted his weight. He wore that signature condescending smirk, the one he deployed whenever he felt the need to remind me that his background in corporate finance somehow made him the intellectual superior in any room. I stopped keeping Zuri tucked securely behind my legs. Trent leaned in close, bringing the sharp scent of expensive cologne and alcohol into my personal space. He kept his voice low, adopting the soothing, patronizing tone of a middle manager addressing an emotional subordinate. "Come on now," Jada, Trent murmured, placing a heavy, unwelcome hand on my shoulder. "Let us just take a deep breath and be rational. Vivian has been planning this night for months. There is no need to get defensive and make a scene like your people always do. Just take the kid to the back table and let the adults handle the optics of the evening." The phrase hung in the air between us, "like your people always do." It was the same casual, insidious racism he had been slipping into conversations for years, always wrapped in the polite veneer of corporate jargon. To Trent, I was not an equal. I was the abrasive, unpolished sister-in-law who did not understand the subtle nuances of high society. He truly believed he was the sophisticated white savior married into a prominent black family, gracing us with his financial acumen. I looked down at his hand on my shoulder, then back up to his eyes. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply waited until he felt the icy discomfort of my stare and slowly removed his hand. He cleared his throat, attempting to recover his authoritative posture. "Look, I am just saying we all have our roles to play tonight. Oh, and by the way, make sure that measly little monthly contribution of yours clears the bank first thing tomorrow morning. The catering bill for this event went significantly over budget, and my corporate cards are tied up in some offshore investments right now. We need your little drop in the bucket to cover the waitstaff." A measly little contribution. The sheer arrogance of his ignorance was almost staggering. Trent had absolutely no idea that my monthly transfer was not just covering the catering. It was the only thing preventing the bank from foreclosing on the very building we were standing in. He thought he was the mastermind managing the family's vast wealth, completely blind to the fact that their accounts had been running on fumes and my silent charity for over a decade. Before I could formulate a response, the sharp click of designer heels echoed on the marble floor. Kendra appeared beside her husband looking like she had just stepped off a runway. She was draped in a silver sequined gown that caught the light of the chandeliers, holding a flute of champagne with an exaggerated elegance. She looked at Zuri, who was still quietly sniffling, and rolled her eyes. God, Jada, do you always have to be so difficult? Kendra sighed, adjusting a diamond bracelet on her wrist. Mom asked you for one simple favor. Keep the kid quiet and looking picture perfect for the press. But you just have to make everything about you, do you not? I am taking her to the back table, Kendra, I replied evenly, my voice completely devoid of the anger they were so desperately trying to provoke. She was hurting my daughter. Oh, please, she barely touched her, Kendra scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. You are so dramatic. You need to understand the pressure Mom is under tonight. This anniversary gala is crucial for our luxury lifestyle brand. It is about projecting an image of absolute perfection. You do not understand because you do not have to carry the weight of this legacy on your shoulders. Kendra took a delicate sip of her champagne, looking me up and down with a mixture of pity and disdain. Someone has to be the face of this family, Jada. Someone has to carry the star power. That is just the way the universe aligned. I have the vision, the charisma, the aesthetic. I am the face of this empire. You are just you. She paused, letting a cruel smile play on her lips. You are great at the behind-the-scenes grunt work. Your little glorified package handling business is cute. It really is. Moving boxes around in dusty warehouses, driving forklifts, whatever it is you do over there. It is honest blue-collar work. But it does not exactly scream black excellence for the cover of a magazine, does it? Mom knows that. Trent knows that. It is time you accepted your place in the hierarchy. I stood there listening to my sister summarize 35 years of family dynamics in a single breathy monologue. She actually believed her failing lifestyle brand, a company that sold overpriced scented candles and pretentious woven baskets, was an empire. She actually believed my multinational supply chain logistics firm, a company that managed shipping routes across 3 continents, was a glorified post office. They had completely isolated themselves in an echo chamber of their own making. Trent chuckled, wrapping his arm around Kendra's waist and pulling her close. Do not be too hard on her, babe, Trent said, pressing a kiss to her temple. We need people like Jada to pack the boxes so visionaries like you can sell them. It is all about synergy. They stood there, a perfectly manicured portrait of unearned privilege and staggering delusion. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to yell, to curse, to prove them right so they could have me escorted out by security and spend the rest of the evening playing the victims of my supposed instability. But I was not going to give them the satisfaction of a scene. The anger inside me had crystallized into something far more dangerous. It had turned into pure strategic calculation. I looked at Kendra, taking in the sparkle of the diamonds I had unknowingly paid for. I looked at Trent, noting the smug confidence fueled by a trust fund I was about to incinerate. You are absolutely right, Kendra, I said quietly. My voice was so calm it seemed to catch them both off guard. Trent's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. We all have our roles to play, and I think it is long past time I started acting my wage. I did not wait for them to decipher the meaning behind my words. I tightened my gentle grip on Zuri's hand and simply walked around them. They parted, slightly confused by my lack of resistance, their insults hanging uselessly in the air. As I guided my daughter toward the shadowy back corner of the ballroom, away from the flashing cameras and the toxic glow of my family, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The invisible chains of obligation and guilt that had tethered me to their sinking ship finally snapped. I settled Zuri into a chair at the empty overflow table, promising her that the bad part of the night was officially over. Then, as Vivian stepped up to the microphone on the grand stage to deliver her keynote speech, I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. The glow of the phone screen illuminated Zuri's tear-stained cheeks. I reached out and gently smoothed down her edges, assuring her that she looked absolutely perfect and that Grandma just did not understand real beauty. I told her we were going to slip out the back doors in just a few minutes, jump into the car, and drive straight to that 24-hour diner she loved so much. I promised her the biggest hot fudge sundae on the menu, the one with the extra cherries and the sparkler on top. A tiny, hesitant smile finally broke through her sadness. She leaned her head against my arm, taking comfort in my quiet promise. That was all the confirmation I needed. My daughter was safe, she was loved, and she was no longer going to be collateral damage in this family's sick game of pretend. Through the massive venue speakers, the sharp tap of a microphone echoed, commanding the room's attention. I looked up to see Vivian standing at the center of the stage, bathed in a warm spotlight. The jazz band had stopped playing. Hundreds of wealthy guests turned their chairs toward her, hanging on to her every word. Vivian adjusted her diamond necklace, smiled radiantly, and began to weave her masterpiece of fiction. She spoke about the value of hard work. She spun a beautiful tear-jerking narrative about how she and my father had built their luxury lifestyle brand with nothing but a dream, tireless dedication, and countless sleepless nights. She painted a picture of early struggles, claiming they had sacrificed everything to build a foundation for their children. She used buzzwords like generational wealth bootstrapping and Black excellence, projecting an image of a flawless dynasty that stood as a pillar of the community. Listening to her confidently take credit for a financial empire that was entirely fabricated made my stomach turn. She paused to wipe a perfectly timed fake tear from her eye as she spoke about the importance of legacy, ensuring her children and grandchildren would never know the struggle of poverty. The audience erupted into polite, admiring applause. It was a spectacular performance. It was also a complete and utter lie. While Vivian basked in the unearned adoration of the city elite, my thumbs were moving quickly across my phone screen. I bypassed the standard banking applications and opened a secure, custom encrypted portal that my chief financial officer had built specifically for my private assets. A biometric scan, a secondary authorization sequence, and a 12-digit passcode granted me access to the hidden architecture of my family's supposed wealth. 10 years ago, when their company first filed for bankruptcy behind closed doors, my father had come to me begging for a temporary loan. He had cried in my living room, terrified of the public humiliation that would follow a corporate collapse. I had just secured my first massive international logistics contract and had the capital to spare. Against my better judgment, I wanted to save them. I set up an anonymous proxy trust fund, filtering the money through 3 different holding companies located in Delaware, so they would never be able to trace it back to the daughter they deemed unworthy. It was supposed to be a 6-month bridge loan to help them restructure their debt. Instead, it became a decade-long life support system. They never restructured. They just spent more comfortable in the knowledge that a mysterious benefactor kept the accounts full. They never once suspected it was the glorified package handler they mocked at every holiday dinner. I scrolled through the transaction history on the screen. The interface displayed the staggering amounts of money I had silently bled out to maintain their vanity. The numbers were sickening. There were the massive monthly mortgage payments for their sprawling estate transferred on the first of every month without fail. There were the platinum corporate credit card bills that Trent and Kendra ran up on luxury vacations, country club memberships, and designer wardrobes. There were the vendors, the public relations teams, the expensive marketing consultants for Kendra's failing business, and the catering deposits for extravagant events, exactly like the one we were sitting at tonight. I was funding the very machinery they used to oppress me. Every insult they hurled at me was financed by my own hard work. Every time Trent mocked my warehouse, he was wearing a bespoke suit I had technically bought. Every time Kendra called me a peasant and bragged about her star power, she was holding a glass of imported champagne that my logistics firm had paid for. They had weaponized my generosity using my own money to build a pedestal from which they could look down on me. Vivian raised her glass high into the air, her voice echoing through the grand ballroom. She offered a toast to the future, to endless prosperity, to the loyal friends in the room, and to the unbreakable strength of our family name. May the next 40 years be as prosperous and beautiful as the last, she declared, flashing a brilliant smile. The crowd raised their glasses in unison, murmuring their agreements and sipping their expensive wine. Flashbulbs went off, capturing the moment of supposed triumph. I did not raise a glass. I stared at the dashboard of the proxy trust portal. At the bottom of the screen, highlighted in a stark clinical red, was the master control panel. I navigated to the active standing orders. My thumb hovered over the command labeled Terminate Funding Protocol. The system prompted a final security check. A bold warning message appeared on the screen, asking me to confirm the permanent cancellation of all automated transfers, credit line guarantees, and asset protections linked to the beneficiary accounts. It reminded me that this action could not be undone without drafting entirely new legal documents and establishing a new proxy framework. There would be no grace period, no warning notification sent to the account holders. The severing of funds would be absolute and immediate. I looked over at Zuri, who was now happily drawing a picture on the back of a napkin, completely unaware of the absolute devastation I was about to unleash. I looked back at the stage where Kendra and Trent had joined Vivian, smiling for the photographers in a picture-perfect display of elite family unity. They looked so secure, so untouchable, perched high atop a mountain of my money. They felt so powerful, telling my crying child she did not belong at their table. I selected the confirm button. The screen loaded for 3 agonizingly long seconds. A small digital circle spun in the center of the display while I listened to the applause washing over my family, a sound they fully believed they had earned. Then the application flashed green. Status changed to revoked. Account closed. Transfer authorizations terminated. The digital mechanics of their ruin were completely silent. There were no alarms, no flashing lights, no sudden gasps from the audience. The jazz band resumed playing their upbeat tunes. The waiters continued circulating with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. The gala continued in all its glittering glory. But I knew the truth. As I slipped my phone back into my clutch and helped Zuri down from her chair, a profound, chilling peace settled over my entire body. The heavy burden I had carried for a decade was instantly gone. They were still up there, smiling for the cameras, completely oblivious to the fact that the floor had just been entirely removed from beneath their feet. Their platinum credit lines were instantly frozen. Their mortgage was now critically past due. Their lifestyle brand was completely insolvent, lacking the capital to even make payroll at the end of the week. The life support machine was officially unplugged, and the corporate rot would begin to show by morning. "Let us go get that ice cream, sweetheart," I whispered, taking her small hand in mine. We walked out the back exit of the ballroom, slipping unnoticed past the kitchen staff and out into the cool night air. We left them behind to dance on the grave of their own empire. They thought they had banished me to the shadows, but they forgot one crucial detail. I was the only one paying the electric bill, and tomorrow morning the lights were going to go out. The weekend faded into a quiet, peaceful Monday morning. The contrast between the toxic atmosphere of the gala and the sanctuary of my own home could not have been more profound. My kitchen was bathed in soft, natural sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The smell of vanilla and melting butter filled the air as I stood at the marble island, flipping golden brown pancakes on the griddle. Zuri was sitting at the breakfast nook, her natural hair beautifully braided for the school week, humming a little tune as she colored in her sketchbook. She had completely forgotten the cruelty of Saturday night, her joy fully restored by the giant hot fudge sundae and a weekend of uninterrupted movie marathons on our giant living room couch. I poured a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, taking a slow, deep breath. The house was calm. My conscience was completely clear. Suddenly, the peaceful silence of my kitchen was violently shattered. My phone, resting on the counter next to the fruit bowl, began to vibrate frantically against the marble. It was not just a single ring. It was a relentless, chaotic barrage of incoming calls, text messages, and urgent voicemails, all flooding in at the exact same time. The screen lit up over and over again, flashing a rapid succession of names. First it was my mother, then my father, then Kendra, then a string of frantic texts in the family group chat that I had muted months ago. I watched the screen glow, took a sip of my coffee, and smiled. The financial earthquake had finally reached the surface. I did not answer the first 5 calls. I simply turned over a pancake and plated it for Zuri, adding a perfect smiley face made of fresh blueberries and sliced strawberries. I set the plate down in front of her, kissed the top of her head, and told her to eat up before the school bus arrived. As I walked back to the kitchen island, the phone started ringing again. This time the caller identification displayed Trent's name. I decided it was time to assess the damage. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear, not saying a word. I just waited. "Jada, what the hell is going on?" Trent barked into the receiver. His voice was completely stripped of its usual patronizing fake corporate smoothness. He sounded breathless, panicked, and unhinged. The background noise on his end painted a very clear picture. I could hear the faint sound of golf clubs clanking, the gentle rustle of wind, and the uncomfortable murmurs of other wealthy men. He was at his exclusive members-only country club, a place where he spent 4 days a week pretending to broker high-level investment deals while actually just playing 18 holes and drinking expensive scotch on my dime. "Good morning, Trent," I replied, my voice as smooth and cool as a glass of water. "Is there a reason you are screaming into my ear at 8 o'clock on a Monday?" "Do not play stupid with me, Jada." He snapped, his breathing heavy, as if he had just sprinted across the putting green. "I am standing here at the clubhouse desk with 3 of my most important prospective clients. I just tried to pay for our morning tea time and breakfast spread. The concierge just handed my platinum corporate card back to me and said it was declined." "Declined, Jada. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I look like an absolute joke in front of men who manage billions of dollars." I took another slow sip of my coffee, savoring the rich flavor and the absolute music of his panic. "That sounds like a personal financial issue, Trent. I'm not sure why you are calling me about your declined credit cards. Perhaps you should call your bank." "I did call the bank, you idiot," he hissed, his voice dropping into a vicious guttural whisper as he tried to hide his meltdown from his clients. "The bank told me the primary account has been frozen. They said the proxy trust fund that backs our entire corporate line of credit was completely dissolved over the weekend." Dissolved. "They are telling me there is zero available balance and that all connected cards are permanently suspended." He was spiraling. The reality of his situation was hitting him in real time, but his overwhelming arrogance prevented him from connecting the dots. He still truly believed I was just the lowly warehouse manager who handled the family's minor logistical errands. He thought the trust fund was a magical infinite well of money managed by some faceless corporate benefactor that my parents had charmed years ago. "You handle the family's administrative garbage." Trent continued, his tone turning incredibly aggressive and ugly. "So I need you to get on your computer right now and fix whatever glitch your ghetto bank is having. Call whoever you need to call. Wire the money from your little business account to cover the spread if you have to. I do not care how you do it, but you need to make sure this card works in the next 5 minutes, or I swear to God I am going to make your life a living hell." There it was. The mask was completely off. The polite, sophisticated white brother-in-law who always preached about corporate synergy and family unity was gone. In his place was a desperate, entitled man throwing a temper tantrum because he could no longer use his wife's black family as a limitless automatic teller machine. The phrase "ghetto bank" hung in the air, a blatant, disgusting microaggression that revealed exactly how he viewed me and the wealth I had built. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. "No, I am not finished," he yelled, abandoning any attempt to keep his voice down. "My clients are staring at me. The club manager is looking at me like I am some kind of con artist. You are going to fix this right now, Jada. You owe us. Kendra said you were acting like a complete lunatic at the gala on Saturday, dragging your kid out of there and disrespecting your mother. This is probably some passive-aggressive stunt you pulled by messing with the accounting software to get back at us. Turn the accounts back on before I drive over to your house and show you what a real problem looks like." I leaned against the marble counter, watching Zuri happily pour syrup over her pancakes. She was safe. My home was a fortress that Trent and his pathetic threats could never penetrate. He was trying to use his gender, his race, and his perceived class superiority to intimidate me into compliance. He wanted me to cower, to apologize, to rush to my computer and save him from his own public humiliation. He wanted the obedient shadow back. "Listen to me very carefully, Trent," I said, my voice dropping an octave, carrying a weight and authority he had never heard from me before. "I am not your administrative assistant, I am not your personal banker, and I am certainly not the safety net for a grown man who cannot afford to buy his own breakfast. What are you talking about? He stammered, clearly thrown off by my icy demeanor. I am telling you the trust fund is empty. I know it is empty, Trent, I replied, enunciating every single word with deadly precision. Because I am the one who emptied it. I am the one who dissolved the proxy trust. I am the mysterious benefactor who has been funding your pathetic, luxurious lifestyle for the past 10 years. And as of Saturday night, when your wife and your mother decided to publicly humiliate my 7-year-old daughter, your free ride officially came to an end. There was a long, stunning silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the wind blowing across the golf course. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head as his arrogant brain tried to process the sheer magnitude of what I had just told him. The glorified package handler he had been mocking for years was the sole owner of the kingdom he had been living in. You are lying, he finally whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and sudden creeping terror. You do not have that kind of money. You run a warehouse. Try to swipe the card again. Trent, I challenged him softly. Go ahead, look the club manager in the eye and ask him to run it one more time. Then I suggest you call your wife. Because your golf game is the least of your problems today. I ended the call. I did not wait for his response. I did not need to hear him beg or scream or threaten me further. The execution was complete. I placed the phone face down on the counter, picked up my coffee cup, and walked over to the breakfast nook to join my daughter. The morning chaos was entirely theirs to navigate. For the first time in my life, my world was perfectly quiet, perfectly secure, and entirely my own. But I knew Trent, I knew Kendra, and I knew Vivian. They would not accept defeat this easily. The initial shock of the bounced checks would quickly morph into desperate rage. They would try to spin the narrative, try to use their connections to force my hand, and try to legally strong-arm me into returning their stolen crowns. They thought this was just a minor skirmish over a suspended credit card. They had no idea I had already positioned my entire legal team to dismantle their lives brick by brick. The game had just begun. I barely had time to pull my stool out and sit down next to my daughter before the phone vibrated against the marble countertop again. The caller identification flashed Trent's name just as it had moments ago. I let it buzz 3 times, taking a bite of my own breakfast, before finally sliding my finger across the screen to accept the call. I fully expected to hear Trent stammering, begging for a temporary bridge loan, or perhaps offering a hollow apology to try and save his country club membership. Instead, I was met with a piercing, hysterical shriek that forced me to hold the device several inches away from my ear. Jada, what the hell did you just tell my husband? Kendra's voice was a frantic, breathless screech. I could hear the sharp echo of the country club locker room in the background. Trent must have sprinted inside the building just to hand her the phone. Are you completely out of your mind? Turn the accounts back on right now. You are not going to ruin my Monday because you are throwing some pathetic, jealous temper tantrum over a seating arrangement. I took another calm sip of my coffee. Good morning to you too, Kendra. I see Trent gave you the news. The news? You think this is some kind of joke? Kendra was hyperventilating now, the carefully constructed facade of the elegant society wife completely shattering through the speaker. Trent is standing here, utterly humiliated. We have investors flying in this afternoon. You cannot just cut off the family trust. That money belongs to the legacy of this family. You owe us that money, Jada. You owe us for everything we have done for you. We graciously allowed you to attend the gala on Saturday. We let you step into a world you do not even belong in, and this is how you repay us. By pulling some malicious ghetto stunt with the bank. Listening to her scream about what I owed them was almost comical. It triggered a flood of memories highlighting the staggering delusion Kendra had been raised in since we were children. Growing up, the financial and emotional resources of our household were exclusively funneled into Kendra's development. She was the golden child, the one deemed pretty enough and charismatic enough to carry the family name into high society. When she wanted to go to an elite private university out of state, my parents remortgaged our family home to pay her tuition in full, ensuring she never had to work a part-time job or take out a single student loan. When she graduated with a useless degree and decided she wanted to be a lifestyle influencer, they handed her $250,000 in seed money to launch her luxury brand. They bought her the designer wardrobe, leased her the imported sports cars, and paid for the public relations team to get her name in the local magazines. Meanwhile, when I graduated from a state college that I paid for myself by working grueling night shifts at a fulfillment center, I asked my parents to simply co-sign a modest $10,000 small business loan so I could secure my first commercial lease. They laughed in my face. My mother told me that logistics was a gritty masculine industry and that I would only embarrass the family name by failing. My father told me they had to protect their credit for Kendra's upcoming product launch. I was entirely on my own. I spent the first 3 years of my business sleeping on an air mattress in a freezing, unheated warehouse on the wrong side of the city. I drove the forklift myself. I loaded the heavy freight trucks myself. I built my massive supply chain empire from absolute scratch, with calloused hands and zero safety net, while Kendra played businesswoman with Daddy's money. And when Daddy's money ran out, she seamlessly transitioned to playing businesswoman with my money. "You owe us, Jada." Kendra repeated, her voice cracking with desperate, entitled rage. "Mom is going to have a heart attack when she finds out what you are doing. You are legally obligated to maintain that trust. It is family money. It is the foundation of our entire brand." "It is not family money, Kendra," I corrected her, keeping my tone deadly calm and steady. "It is my money. It is the money I made from the gritty blue-collar business you love to mock so much. There is no magic trust fund. There is no anonymous benefactor. For the last 10 years, every single time you swiped that corporate card to buy a $1,000 bottle of champagne, you were spending my profits. You are a 32-year-old woman playing dress-up, funded entirely by the sister you just banished to the back of the room. You are a liar. You are a sick, jealous liar. My brand generates millions. Your brand generates debt, Kendra," I stated, cleanly cutting through her delusion like a surgical blade. "Your luxury candle business has not turned a single cent of profit in 8 years. You spend $400,000 a year on marketing and sell maybe $50,000 in actual inventory. You are running a vanity project. I have the financial statements right here on my laptop because I am the one who has been covering your massive, gaping deficits every single quarter. Do you know what happens to a vanity project when the proxy trust stops covering the payroll? You go bankrupt. Your staff will walk out by Friday morning." "Shut up. Shut up. You cannot do this. We will sue you. We will take everything you have. Trent knows the best corporate lawyers in the state. We will drag you through court and prove you are withholding family assets. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand the fact that I am the star of this family. You have always hated me because Mom loves me more." I listened to her unhinged threats, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound sense of pity mixed with deep, settling satisfaction. She was entirely weaponless, waving an empty gun and screaming at the top of her lungs. She thought her proximity to whiteness through Trent and her proximity to imaginary wealth gave her power over me. She had no idea that Trent's arrogant corporate lawyers were entirely outmatched by the legal army I kept on retainer. "Kendra, you can call every lawyer in the city," I replied, my voice dropping to a low whisper that commanded total silence on the other end of the line. "But you cannot sue someone for deciding to stop giving you free money. There is no legal contract forcing me to fund your pathetic existence. The charity is over. And by the way, when you call those expensive lawyers, make sure you ask them how much they charge per hour. Because starting today, you are going to have to pay them with your own money." Before she could launch into another screaming fit, I pressed the red button to end the call. The silence in my kitchen returned sweet and absolute. I looked over at Zuri. She had finished her pancakes and was happily wiping syrup off her chin with a napkin, her feet kicking under the table. She had not heard a single word of the venom being spewed through the phone speaker. She was safe in her bubble of love and security, entirely shielded from the generational curse I was currently dismantling. I knew the phone would not ring again from Trent's number. Kendra was too cowardly to call back after being confronted with the stark, terrifying truth of her own incompetence. She would run crying to the one person who had always shielded her from consequence. She would call our parents. She would spin a wild, hysterical tale about how I had lost my mind and hijacked the family accounts. She would play the victim exactly as she had been trained to do since childhood, weaponizing our parents' affection to fight her battles. Right on cue, the security notification chimed softly on my kitchen wall monitor. I glanced at the high-definition screen displaying the live camera feed from my front gates. A black luxury sedan had just pulled abruptly into my driveway, its tires screeching against the pristine pavement. The heavy doors swung open, and my father Roland stepped out. His face was visibly red with fury, his posture rigid with the self-righteous authority he always used to keep me in line. He marched aggressively toward my front door, fully prepared to demand my submission and protect his golden child. I took a final sip of my coffee, straightened my posture, and walked calmly toward the foyer. Let him come. I had a very special piece of paper waiting just for him. The heavy oak front door of my home did not even have a chance to settle in its frame before my father pushed it wide open. He did not bother to ring the bell. He did not wait to be invited inside. Roland marched into my expansive foyer with the heavy, purposeful strides of a patriarch who was accustomed to demanding absolute obedience from everyone in his orbit. His face was a mask of rigid fury, his jaw clenched tight under his perfectly trimmed silver beard. He was wearing his signature charcoal morning suit, the one he wore when he wanted to project an aura of intimidating corporate authority. He fully expected to find a cowering, apologetic daughter ready to be scolded into submission. Instead, he found me standing calmly at the center of my kitchen, leisurely pouring myself a second cup of dark roast coffee. "Jada, what in the name of God are you doing?" He bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings of my living room. He stopped at the edge of the kitchen island, slapping his leather driving gloves down onto the marble. "Your mother is at home having a localized panic attack. Trent is pacing the floor of the country club locker room because his cards are declining. Kendra is hyperventilating in her bedroom. You are tearing this family apart over a minor misunderstanding at a dinner table." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the warm liquid coat my throat before I spoke. "Good morning, Dad. It is nice to see you too. Did you happen to bring an apology for your granddaughter, or did you just come to yell at me in my own house?" He waved his hand dismissively through the air, completely brushing off the mention of Zuri. "Do not try to deflect the conversation by hiding behind the child. What Vivian did last night was about protecting the brand. It was about optics. We were surrounded by the most influential investors in the city, and your mother was simply trying to maintain the flawless aesthetic we have worked decades to build. You are acting like a petulant, jealous teenager. You are supposed to be a team player, Jada. We are a family. We protect our legacy at all costs. A team player." The phrase echoed in my mind, bringing a bitter taste to my mouth that had nothing to do with the coffee. In Roland's vocabulary, being a team player meant I was expected to endlessly sacrifice my own comfort, my own finances, and my own dignity so that Kendra and Vivian could shine. It meant I was the workhorse pulling the carriage while they waved to the crowds from the velvet seats. I set my coffee mug down on a coaster. "Your legacy is a lie, Dad, and I am tired of paying the electric bill for your theater production." Roland leaned over the island, planting his hands firmly on the marble, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "You listen to me right now. I do not know what kind of malicious computer trick you played to freeze the family trust fund, but you are going to call the bank and reverse it immediately. We have vendors to pay. Kendra has a massive product launch at the end of the week. If you do not turn that money back on this instant, I will officially disown you." He delivered the threat with maximum theatrical weight, his eyes wide and glaring. He thought he was dropping a nuclear bomb. "I will write you entirely out of the will, Jada." He continued, his voice dripping with venom. "You will not see a single dime of this family's wealth. You will be completely cut off from the society we built. You will no longer be a part of this family name. You will have absolutely nothing." I stood there for a moment, simply absorbing the absolute tragedy of his delusion. My own father was threatening to disown me, to protect the daughter who had never worked a real day in her life. He was willing to throw me away over a suspended credit card. The last tiny lingering thread of daughterly affection I had for him snapped, dissolving into the cold morning air. I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was a sharp, clinical expression that made Roland suddenly blink and take a half step back. "You cannot cut me out of a will that has a negative balance, Dad," I said softly. "And you cannot disown me because I am the one who owns you." I turned around and opened the sleek, hidden security drawer built into the cabinetry behind me. I pulled out a thick, unmarked manila folder. I turned back to the island and tossed it onto the marble. It slid smoothly across the polished surface, stopping exactly an inch from his expensive leather gloves. "Open it," I commanded. Roland stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. His bravado began to visibly fracture. He looked from the folder to my face, searching for any sign that this was a bluff. Finding none, his trembling hands reached out and flipped open the heavy paper cover. Inside was a stack of legal documents printed on thick, watermarked paper. The top page was a deed of trust heavily stamped and notarized. "What is this?" he muttered, his eyes darting across the legal jargon, unable or perhaps unwilling to comprehend what he was looking at. "That is the deed to the sprawling 10,000-square-foot estate you and Vivian love to show off to your country club friends," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "The house with the imported Italian marble foyer, the heated driveway, and the custom wine cellar. The house you claim is the physical manifestation of your self-made generational wealth." Roland swallowed hard, his eyes scanning down to the signatures at the bottom of the page. "This is the deed to our house, but it says it is owned by Apex Holdings, LLC. We leased the house from the investment firm that bailed us out." I tapped my manicured fingernail against the marble countertop. "Exactly. 5 years ago, when your lifestyle brand was completely underwater and drowning in undisclosed debt, the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on your precious estate. You and Vivian were terrified. You were days away from the sheriff showing up to put your designer furniture on the front lawn. Then, by some absolute miracle, a private investment firm called Apex Holdings stepped in. They bought the house directly from the bank for cash, assuming the massive debt, and allowed you to sign a discreet private lease agreement so you could stay in the house and save face in front of your wealthy friends. You thought you charmed a brilliant Wall Street investor." Roland looked up at me, his face draining of all its color. The skin around his mouth went slack. "I am Apex Holdings' dad," I said, delivering the words with devastating precision. "I formed the Shell Corporation. I paid off the bank in cash using the profits from my logistics company. I am the private investor you have been writing your monthly rent checks to for the last 5 years. You are not a self-made titan of industry. You are my tenant." He stumbled backward, bumping into one of the velvet bar stools. He grasped the edge of the counter to steady himself, his breath coming in short, erratic gasps. "You bought our house. You bought the family estate. I bought a distressed property from a bank." I corrected him, "because I knew if I gave you the money directly, you would just blow it on another one of Kendra's failed business ventures. I gave you a roof over your head. I gave you the dignity of keeping your secret. And how did you repay me? You let my mother grab my child by the arm and banish her to a dark corner because her natural hair did not fit your aesthetic." Roland opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The commanding patriarch who had kicked my front door open 5 minutes ago was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, terrified old man, realizing he was standing on a trapdoor. "But that is not the best part of the folder," I continued, my voice steady and unyielding. "Look at the second page." His shaking hands fumbled with the deed, pushing it aside to reveal a bright yellow legal document underneath. It was a standard state-issued form filled out with bold black ink. Since I terminated the proxy trust fund on Saturday night, I went ahead and audited the accounting books for Apex Holdings this morning, I explained, crossing my arms over my chest. "It turns out that without my silent charity funneling money into your accounts, you have not been able to clear a real payment in quite some time. You are currently 60 days late on your rent for the estate." Roland stared at the yellow paper, his eyes widening in absolute horror. "That is a formal 30-day notice of eviction," I told him, dropping the final hammer. "You and Vivian have exactly 1 month to pack up your custom wardrobes, your expensive art collection, and your manufactured pride. I suggest you start looking for a small apartment on the other side of town. Because on the 31st of this month, I am changing the locks, and I am putting my property back on the market. Jada, please, Roland whispered, his voice cracking, the threat of disowning me entirely forgotten. You cannot do this. You cannot put your own mother and father out on the street. It will destroy us. The scandal will ruin everything we have built. I looked at him, feeling absolutely no remorse. You destroyed yourselves the moment you decided my daughter was not good enough for your table. Now get out of my house, and do not ever push your way through my front door again. I turned my back on him and walked over to the sink to wash my coffee mug. I listened as he stood there in stunned silence for a long, agonizing minute before slowly turning around and shuffling out the front door. The heavy oak door clicked softly shut behind him, sealing my fortress and leaving me in perfect, undisturbed peace. The financial execution was complete. Now it was time to prepare for the inevitable social warfare. It took exactly 48 hours for the reality of their absolute financial ruin to fully set in, and for the panic to solidify into a desperate, aggressive strategy. They had realized that screaming over the telephone and throwing emotional temper tantrums in my kitchen were not going to turn the money back on. My father had undoubtedly returned to their foreclosed estate and delivered the crushing news of the eviction notice. The illusion of their self-made empire was in ashes, and the only person with the power to rebuild it was the daughter they had spent a lifetime treating like an inconvenience. But rather than offering a genuine apology or attempting to make amends, they chose the only language they truly understood: intimidation. They decided it was time to bring in the heavy artillery, and in my family that meant deploying Trent and his proximity to corporate power. On Wednesday morning, I was sitting behind the massive custom-cut obsidian desk in my corner office. For years, Trent and Kendra had loudly mocked my business, referring to it as a glorified package handling service. In their minds, they pictured me sitting in a small, dusty, prefabricated metal building on the outskirts of the city, wearing a high-visibility vest and counting cardboard boxes on a clipboard. They had never once bothered to actually visit my headquarters. If they had, they would have known that my logistics firm did not just move boxes. We managed the entire supply chain infrastructure for 3 of the largest e-commerce conglomerates on the globe. My office was located on the 42nd floor of a sleek glass and steel skyscraper in the center of the downtown financial district. The walls were floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic, uninterrupted view of the city skyline and the bustling shipping port in the distance. The floors were polished dark mahogany, and the waiting area outside my office was staffed by an executive assistant who made a higher annual salary than Kendra's entire vanity brand had generated in a decade. It was an environment built on genuine quiet and terrifying power. At precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, my desk intercom chimed softly. My assistant, a brilliant and fiercely protective woman named Sarah, spoke in a cool, measured tone. Jada. There is a Mr. Trent Spencer in the main lobby. He is accompanied by 2 other gentlemen who appear to be legal counsel. He is demanding to see you immediately and is currently threatening the front desk security team with a lawsuit if he is not granted access. I smiled, closing the financial prospectus I had been reviewing. Send them up to the executive floor, Sarah, and please make sure security escorts them directly to my office. I stood up, smoothed down the skirt of my tailored navy suit, and poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the crystal carafe on my credenza. I wanted to be standing when they walked in. I wanted Trent to feel the sheer crushing scale of the room. A few minutes later, the heavy double doors to my office swung open. Trent stormed into the room, flanked by 2 older white men in immaculately tailored, aggressively expensive charcoal pinstripe suits. They carried thick leather briefcases and wore the predatory, confident expressions of men who billed $1,000 an hour to make other people's problems disappear. However, the moment Trent crossed the threshold, his aggressive momentum noticeably faltered. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes darting around the expansive, beautifully designed executive suite. He looked at the modern art on the walls, the massive digital mapping screens displaying global shipping routes in real time, and the breathtaking view of the city from 40 stories up. This was not the dusty warehouse he had expected to storm. This was a corporate fortress, and for a brief, satisfying second, I saw genuine confusion and intimidation flash across his face. But Trent was a creature of immense ego. He quickly recovered, puffing out his chest and adjusting the lapels of his suit jacket. He marched toward my desk, planting his hands firmly on the polished obsidian surface, attempting to physically dominate the space between us. "You think you are incredibly clever, do you not?" Jada, Trent began, his voice dripping with venom and condescension. "You think you can just play real estate games with Roland and hold this family hostage because you got lucky with some warehouse money? You think you can just shut down a generational trust fund on a whim?" I took a slow sip of my water, looking at him with absolute calm. "Good morning, Trent. I see you brought friends. I did not realize you needed an audience to beg for an allowance." Trent flushed a deep, angry red. The two lawyers stepped forward, placing their heavy leather briefcases on the edge of my desk with a synchronized, intimidating thud. "We are not here to beg for anything," Trent snapped, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "We are here to give you one final opportunity to rectify your massive illegal mistake before we absolutely destroy you in a court of law." Jada. I would like to introduce you to Richard Sterling and Marcus Vance, senior partners at Sterling and Hayes. They represent the corporate interests of my investment firm, and as of this morning, they represent the Spencer Family Trust. The lawyer on the left, Richard, offered a tight, patronizing smile. "Ms. Jada, it is in your best interest to listen very carefully to what we have to say today. We are prepared to file an emergency injunction in Superior Court by the end of the hour." Trent stepped back, allowing his expensive attack dogs to take the lead, folding his arms across his chest with a smug, victorious expression. He was entirely in his element now, weaponizing the legal system to force a black woman back into what he believed was her rightful subservient place. "Your actions over the weekend constitute a blatant and malicious breach of fiduciary duty," the second lawyer, Marcus, stated smoothly, opening his briefcase and pulling out a thick stack of legal documents. "By unilaterally dissolving the proxy trust fund without prior written notification to the beneficiaries, you have engaged in constructive fraud. You have intentionally inflicted financial distress on your parents and your sister, destabilizing a long-standing family enterprise." I listened as they rattled off a series of complex legal buzzwords, none of which actually applied to the situation. They were throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping the sheer volume of their legal jargon would terrify a supposedly uneducated warehouse manager into immediate submission. Furthermore, Richard chimed in, his tone growing sharper and more threatening. "Your attempt to evict your parents from their estate using a shell corporation is a clear case of deceptive business practices. We will pierce the corporate veil of this Apex Holdings, LLC. We will drag you into years of brutal, exhausting litigation. We will freeze every single personal and business asset you have while the courts sort this out. Your little shipping company will not survive the legal fees we are going to pile onto your desk." Trent stepped forward again, leaning his face closer to mine, his eyes wide and manic. "Do you hear that, Jada? We will freeze everything. You will not be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone run this business. You stepped way out of your league. You are a glorified logistics coordinator trying to play financial chess with men who do this for a living. I told you on Monday that I would make your life a living hell if you did not turn those accounts back on, and I am a man of my word." He slammed his hand on the desk to emphasize his point. "You are going to log onto your computer right now, reinstate the proxy trust, and transfer 3 months of operating capital to cover the damages you caused. Then you are going to sign a quitclaim deed transferring ownership of the family estate back into your parents' names. If you do that, we will walk out of here and pretend this little temper tantrum never happened. If you refuse, we file the papers, and I promise you I will not stop until you are completely bankrupt." He stood there panting, slightly convinced he had just delivered the ultimate checkmate. He thought his white male privilege, backed by 2 aggressive corporate litigators, was an unstoppable force. He expected me to crumble, to cry, to beg for mercy, and sign whatever papers they put in front of me just to make the scary lawyers go away. He expected the quiet, obedient sister-in-law to finally surrender. I looked at the thick stack of legal threats sitting on my desk. Then I looked at the 2 lawyers who were watching me with cold, calculating eyes. Finally, I looked up at Trent, who was smirking, already tasting his unearned victory. The silence in the massive office stretched on for 10 agonizingly long seconds. I did not blink. I did not move to open my laptop. I just let them stand there in the quiet, sterile air of my executive suite, letting the sheer absurdity of their demands sink into the polished mahogany floor. They had come into my kingdom, stood in front of my throne, and threatened to take away a crown they did not even know I was wearing. The arrogance was breathtaking, but their ignorance was going to be fatal. Richard Sterling was the first to break the heavy silence. He cleared his throat, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive tailored shirt, as if the stillness of the room was physically uncomfortable for him. He leaned forward, placing both of his pale hands flat against the cool surface of my desk. He dropped his voice into a low, patronizing register, the kind of tone a disappointed teacher might use with a slow student. "Miss Jada, we understand that you have been through a lot of personal turmoil over the years." Richard began, offering a smile that did not quite reach his cold eyes. "My team has taken the liberty of thoroughly reviewing your background before coming here today. We know all about your late husband, Michael. We know about the financial mess he left you in when he passed away." I felt a sudden sharp coldness settle over my chest at the sound of Michael's name in his mouth. "We know that Michael was a nobody who left you with absolutely nothing," Richard continued, entirely unaware that he was stepping onto a landmine. "We know he was just a low-level warehouse worker who convinced you to max out your personal credit cards to buy a single delivery truck. Your parents were incredibly transparent with us about how they had to financially support you after his reckless business decisions nearly left you bankrupt and homeless. They stepped in to save you out of the goodness of their hearts." I did not flinch, but beneath the surface of my obsidian desk, my hands slowly curled into tight fists. The sheer audacity of the lie was staggering. Vivian and Roland had completely fabricated my history, feeding Trent and his lawyers a pathetic, desperate narrative to elevate their own status. Michael was never a low-level worker. He was a brilliant supply chain data analyst. We built this logistics firm together from the ground up, working side by side in the trenches to secure our first major commercial contracts. When Michael passed away from a sudden tragic heart defect 5 years ago, he did not leave me with debt. He left me with a rapidly expanding enterprise, a proprietary routing algorithm that revolutionized our industry, and a broken heart that I healed by pouring my soul into making our shared dream a global reality. My parents did not even attend Michael's funeral. Vivian had claimed she could not reschedule a crucial country club luncheon, and Roland had said he did not want to associate the family name with a blue-collar tragedy. They wrote Michael off because he was a dark-skinned black man who wore steel-toed boots to work instead of a designer suit. They never bothered to learn what he actually did for a living, and they clearly passed that aggressive ignorance directly onto Trent. Before Richard could continue spinning his fictional tale of my financial incompetence, Trent held up a hand, signaling the lawyer to step back. Trent wanted to take control of the room. He wanted to be the alpha. He began to slowly pace back and forth across my office, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the polished mahogany floor. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the sprawling city skyline, shaking his head with an exaggerated sigh of disbelief. "You know, Jada, I have to admit, you have a real talent for creating a facade," Trent said, gesturing vaguely at the expansive view. "This office space is incredible. It really is. I am sure you are paying an absolute fortune to lease this corner suite, just so you can play pretend CEO. People from your specific background always seem to do that. You get a little bit of money, a minor local contract, and you immediately blow your operating budget on flashy aesthetics to make yourselves look important. It is classic hustle culture, all flash, no actual substance." He turned away from the window and walked back toward me, a cruel, mocking smirk playing on his lips. He was using the exact same coded, racially charged language that my mother used when she wanted to put someone in their place. "But you need to understand that leasing a nice office does not mean you have the pedigree to sit at the adults' table." Trent continued, leaning his hip against one of my velvet guest chairs. You lack financial literacy, Jada. You do not understand how real wealth operates. Kendra understands it. Your father understands it. They possess the kind of sophisticated corporate acumen that takes generations to cultivate. You are just a worker bee who managed to save up a few dollars. And now, because your feelings got hurt at a party, you are trying to use those few dollars to hold your intellectual superiors hostage. I remained entirely silent, my face a carefully constructed mask of polite indifference. I let him speak. I let him dig his grave as deep as he possibly could. It is actually quite sad, Trent murmured, dropping his voice into a tone of mock sympathy that made my skin crawl. You have spent your entire life being jealous of Kendra. She is beautiful, she is charismatic, and she married a man who actually knows how to protect and multiply her assets. You married a guy who drove a truck and left you to beg your parents for a handout. I understand why you are angry, Jada. I really do. It must be exhausting to constantly compare yourself to true excellence and always come up short. Marcus, the second lawyer, nodded in agreement, opening his leather portfolio to reveal a stack of freshly printed legal demands. It is best to just surrender now, Ms. Jada Marcus chimed in softly. Do not let your pride ruin whatever small success you have managed to scrape together here. We can freeze your commercial bank accounts by noon. We can tie up your delivery trucks in endless regulatory injunctions. We will bleed your little business dry. Trent stepped forward, picking up the stack of papers from the portfolio and tossing them carelessly onto the center of my desk. They slid across the polished surface, coming to a stop right next to my crystal water carafe. He reached inside the breast pocket of his custom suit, pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen, and slammed it down on top of the documents. I am going to do you a massive favor, Jada, Trent said, planting both hands on my desk and leaning his face so close to mine I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. I am going to let you walk away from this massive mistake with a warning. You are going to sign that document. It legally reinstates the proxy trust and issues a formal apology to the family holding company, waiving your rights to any future interference. You are going to cover the legal fees for Richard and Marcus, and you are going to immediately transfer the deed to the estate back to Roland where it belongs. He tapped his index finger aggressively against the top page of the contract. If you do exactly what I tell you to do right now, I will convince Kendra and your parents to forgive this little outburst of yours. Trent threatened, his eyes wide and manic with unchecked privilege. We will let you go back to moving your cardboard boxes in peace. But if you refuse, I am going to make sure you lose this fancy office. I am going to make sure you lose your business. I will strip you down until you are right back where Michael left you. A nobody with absolutely nothing. Sign the papers, Jada. He stood up straight, crossing his arms over his chest, flanked by his two expensive legal mercenaries. They formed a wall of arrogant white corporate power, fully expecting the isolated black woman behind the desk to tremble and obey. They had fed off my family's lies, ingested their delusions, and walked into my headquarters completely blind to the reality of their situation. I slowly looked down at the golden pen resting on top of their ridiculous, unenforceable demands. I did not feel fear. I did not feel intimidated. All I felt was the thrilling, undeniable surge of absolute power. I let the silence hang in the room for another long moment, allowing Trent to savor what he thought was the final second of his victory. Then I slowly reached out and picked up the gold pen. I did not move toward the contract. Instead, I calmly pressed a hidden button under the lip of my desk, unlocking the heavy double doors behind them, and prepared to show Trent exactly what true corporate acumen looked like. The heavy double doors behind Trent clicked, unlocked, and immediately swung open. The sound was crisp and sudden, cutting through the arrogant silence Trent had tried to establish. He and his two legal mercenaries turned around, their smug expressions faltering, as three figures stepped into my executive suite. They did not look like the local, overpriced corporate bullies Trent had hired. They looked like apex predators. Leading the group was Olivia Grant, my chief legal officer. She was a brilliant, striking African-American woman who had spent 15 years dismantling monopolies on Wall Street before I poached her for my own empire. She wore a tailored crimson suit that commanded instant respect, and she was flanked by two senior partners from the most ruthless corporate litigation firm in the country. They walked past Trent without even acknowledging his existence, moving with a synchronized quiet power that instantly shifted the gravitational pull of the entire room. Olivia reached my desk and placed a sleek black leather portfolio down right next to the absurd stack of demands Trent had presented. She offered me a warm, respectful nod before turning her sharp gaze toward the three men standing on the other side of the mahogany surface. Trent let out a nervous, dismissive scoff, trying to regain control of the narrative. Jada, what is this? Are you really trying to put on a show for us? Bringing in your own local attorneys is not going to change the legal reality of your situation. You committed fraud. I did not commit fraud, Trent. I replied, my voice perfectly level. I simply stopped paying for your life. And these are not local attorneys. This is my executive legal counsel. Olivia, please introduce yourself to Mr. Sterling and Mr. Vance. Olivia offered a smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. Gentlemen, she said, her voice smooth and authoritative. My name is Olivia Grant. I am the Chief Legal Officer and General Counsel for Apex Logistics and its international subsidiaries. It is fascinating to meet the legal representation for Oakwood Financial. Fascinating and highly problematic for both of you. Richard Sterling furrowed his brow, his professional arrogance suddenly masked by a flicker of genuine confusion. Problematic in what way? We are here representing the Spencer Family Trust and Trent's executive interests. There is no conflict here. I picked up the gold fountain pen Trent had so aggressively slammed onto my desk just minutes prior. I rolled it slowly between my fingers, feeling the heavy, expensive metal. Then I reached out and pulled the thick, glossy document out of Olivia's black portfolio. It was not a lawsuit. It was not a cease and desist letter. It was a massive, intricately detailed corporate structure chart. I pushed it across the obsidian desk, letting it slide until it stopped perfectly in front of Richard and Trent. Take a close look at that chart, Richard, I commanded softly. Trent leaned over, his eyes scanning the web of corporate logos and subsidiary lines. Richard and Vance leaned in as well. The chart was a map of my entire empire. At the very top, in bold silver lettering, was Apex Logistics. Below it branched out dozens of smaller supply chain companies, international holding firms, and commercial real estate portfolios, including the shell company that currently owned my parents' foreclosed estate. But the most important line on the entire chart was the thick, bold stroke connecting my parent company to a massive financial conglomerate known as Horizon Global Partners. Horizon Global Partners was the apex predator of the regional investment world. They were the parent conglomerate that owned dozens of smaller boutique investment firms, including Oakwood Financial. Oakwood Financial was the firm where Trent was currently employed as a senior vice president of wealth management. Trent pointed a shaking finger at the chart. Why is Horizon on here? What is this garbage, Jada? Horizon is my parent company. You do not have anything to do with them. I looked directly into his panicked eyes. 3 weeks ago, Apex Logistics executed a highly aggressive, completely confidential, hostile takeover of Horizon Global Partners. We leveraged our global shipping dominance to squeeze their supply chain investments, tanked their quarterly projections, and bought out their majority shareholders for pennies on the dollar. The acquisition was finalized and quietly filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission last Thursday. The silence that fell over the room this time was not arrogant. It was suffocating. It was the sound of a man realizing he had just walked into a lion's den wearing a suit made of raw meat. I continued, my voice echoing clearly off the glass walls. I do not just run a warehouse, Trent. I own the warehouse. I own the shipping routes. I own the commercial real estate. And as of last Thursday, I own Horizon Global Partners, which means by direct corporate extension, I own Oakwood Financial. I am your boss. Or to be more precise, I am your boss's boss. Richard Sterling audibly gasped. He physically took a step back from the desk, his face draining of all color. He was a seasoned corporate lawyer, and it only took him a fraction of a second to realize the absolute catastrophe he had just walked into. By threatening me, He was legally threatening the chief executive officer of his own client's parent company. It was a massive career-ending conflict of interest. If he did not leave this room immediately, Olivia could have him disbarred by the end of the week. Marcus packed the briefcases. Richard barked, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Pack them right now!" "What are you doing?" Trent yelled, turning to his lawyers in absolute disbelief. "You work for me. You cannot just leave. You said we were going to freeze her accounts. You said we were going to sue her." "We cannot sue her, you absolute idiot!" Richard hissed aggressively, stuffing his documents back into his leather bag. "She owns the company that pays our retainer. You lied to us. You told us she was some uneducated warehouse manager. You brought us in here to threaten the majority shareholder of Horizon Global. Our representation of you is officially terminated effective immediately. Do not ever call our offices again." Without another word, Richard and Vance turned on their heels and sprinted out of my office, leaving Trent completely alone. The heavy double doors clicked shut behind them, sealing Trent inside with me and my legal team. The transformation in Trent was spectacular. The smug, condescending white corporate savior who had just threatened to reduce me to absolutely nothing was entirely gone. His shoulders slumped. His breathing became shallow and erratic. Sweat beaded on his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled hair. He looked back at the corporate structure chart, his eyes darting frantically over the lines connecting my name to his livelihood. "Jada," Trent stammered, his voice shrinking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Jada, please, let us just take a breath here. We are family. You know, I was just upset about the golf club. I did not mean any of those things I said about Michael. I swear to you. I was just stressed because Kendra has been screaming at me all morning. You know how she gets. We can work this out. We do not need to let business get in the way of family." I sat back in my plush leather chair, twirling his gold fountain pen in my hand. "Family," I repeated, testing the word on my tongue. "That is a fascinating concept coming from you, Trent. Because when my mother humiliated my daughter in front of hundreds of people, you told me not to make a scene like my people always do. When you wanted your credit cards turned back on, you called my business a ghetto bank. You spent years eating food I paid for, sleeping in vacation homes I funded, and wearing suits I financed, all while treating me like dirt on your shoe. You did not care about family when you thought you held the power. You only care about family now because you realize I hold the guillotine." Olivia stepped forward and placed a single sheet of paper perfectly in the center of my desk. It was an executive restructuring order bearing the official letterhead of Horizon Global Partners. As the new majority shareholder, I have spent the weekend reviewing the massive redundancies within the Oakwood financial division. I stated, my tone shifting into pure, ruthless corporate execution. I found it incredibly interesting that a senior vice president of wealth management spends 4 days a week drinking scotch at a country club while generating absolutely zero new client acquisitions. Your division is a drain on my resources. "Jada, please," Trent begged, stepping closer to the desk, his hands raised in surrender. "We have a mortgage. We have investors flying in today. If you cut off the trust fund and I lose this job, Kendra and I will be entirely bankrupt by Friday. We will lose everything." I uncapped his heavy gold fountain pen. I pressed the nib against the bottom line of the executive restructuring order. I looked him dead in the eye, ensuring he saw absolutely zero mercy in my expression. "Then you better start packing boxes, Trent," I whispered. "I hear my logistics company is always hiring entry-level package handlers." I signed my name with a fluid, elegant stroke. I authorized the immediate mass layoff of his entire wealth management department. I capped the pen, stood up from my chair, and handed the document to Olivia. "Your position has been eliminated, Trent," I told him, my voice ringing with finality. "You are fired, effective this very second. Security is already clearing out your office across town, and your corporate access badges have been deactivated." Trent turned ghost pale. His mouth opened and closed silently like a fish pulled out of water. The sheer magnitude of his ruin had finally crushed the last remaining ounce of his ego. He had walked into my office a king, and he was leaving it a completely broken, unemployed man with no trust fund, no credit, and no future. I pressed the intercom button on my desk and instructed my front security desk to come escort the former employee off the premises. The board was set, the nights were falling, and I knew exactly who was going to come crying to my gates next. Word of Trent's firing spread through my family like a wildfire. By Thursday evening, my phone was entirely silent. There were no angry text messages from Kendra. There were no booming authoritative demands from my father. They had finally realized that attempting to intimidate me in a corporate boardroom was a catastrophic failure. The financial channels were completely blocked. Their legal avenues were destroyed, and their imaginary corporate shields were shattered into a million pieces. But I knew my mother better than anyone. Vivian was a woman who built her entire identity on public perception and social manipulation. If she could not bankrupt me legally, she would try to bankrupt me socially. It started early Friday morning. I was driving Zuri to school, enjoying the quiet hum of the engine and the bright morning sun when my car dashboard softly chimed. My executive assistant had flagged an audio clip for me to urgently review. It was an episode of a highly influential internet radio show and podcast that was wildly popular among the affluent African American families in our social circle. The show focused on wealth-building community leadership and socialite gossip. The host was interviewing a very special guest who claimed to be suffering from a heartbreaking family tragedy. I pressed play on the dashboard screen, and my mother's tearful, trembling voice immediately filled the cabin of my car. Vivian was putting on the absolute performance of a lifetime. She did not mention her suspended credit cards. She did not mention the massive foreclosure of her sprawling estate. She certainly did not mention that her golden child was running a bankrupt vanity project. Instead, she painted a terrifying, elaborate picture of a daughter who had completely lost her grip on reality. She spoke in hushed, devastated tones, telling the podcast host that I was suffering from a severe mental breakdown following the anniversary gala. She claimed I had illegally locked the family out of our shared generational trust fund in a fit of paranoid delusion. She used all the right buzzwords to perfectly manipulate the audience. She talked about the deep importance of protecting Black wealth, claiming that my actions were not just a personal attack on our family, but a malicious attack on the community's economic progress. It is just so painful to watch someone you love tear down everything our ancestors fought so hard to build. Vivian sniffled through the car speakers, her voice breaking with manufactured grief. We gave Jada everything. We financially supported her little logistics venture when nobody else believed in her. And now she is trying to destroy our entire legacy out of pure, unprovoked spite. We are just praying she gets the psychiatric help she so desperately needs before she ruins her own life completely. I listened to her confidently rewrite history. She was publicly taking credit for the business I built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. She was framing my financial independence as a mental illness. It was a brilliant, wicked strategy. By painting me as unhinged, she instantly discredited anything I might say to defend myself. But then Vivian crossed the absolute unforgivable line. The podcast host, eating up every word of the drama, asked how the rest of the family was coping with my supposed breakdown. Vivian let out a long, heavy sigh that sounded incredibly realistic. We are just so incredibly worried about my granddaughter Zuri. My mother whispered, her tone dripping with fake maternal concern. Jada is creating such a toxic, unstable environment for that sweet girl. She dragged that poor child out of our family anniversary event in a manic rage, screaming at guests and causing a horrible scene. She is using Zuri as a pawn to hurt us. As a grandmother, it completely breaks my heart to see a child subjected to such unfit parenting. We are currently exploring all our legal options to ensure Zuri's safety and well-being. I gripped the leather steering wheel, my knuckles turning completely white. I kept my face perfectly neutral because Zuri was sitting right in the back seat, happily looking out the window at the passing trees, entirely unaware that her grandmother was broadcasting lies to thousands of listeners. My mother was actively trying to build a public case to paint me as an unfit mother. She was laying the groundwork to turn the entire community against me, hoping the extreme social pressure would break me down and force me to hand back the keys to her kingdom. She was threatening the one thing in this world I loved more than my own life. I paused the audio. I took a deep breath, letting the cold, calculating focus wash over me once again. Vivian wanted a public war. She was about to get one. The podcast was only the first phase of her character assassination. By Sunday morning, Vivian took her smear campaign to the absolute center of our community, the church. We attended a massive historic congregation where social standing and public appearances were often treated with just as much reverence as the Sunday sermon. I had chosen to stay home that morning, enjoying a quiet breakfast with my daughter, but my phone began to buzz endlessly with text messages from the few people who still had direct access to me. According to the messages pouring in, Vivian had requested a special moment of prayer during the morning announcements. She stood before the entire congregation, dressed in modest, understated black clothing, wiping away genuine-looking tears with a lace handkerchief. She asked the massive church to pray for her estranged daughter who had lost her way. She repeated the vicious lies from the podcast, whispering to the elder board that I was financially abusing my elderly parents, holding their retirement assets hostage, and denying them access to their only grandchild. She played the grieving victim with absolute mastery. The character assassination was swift, brutal, and incredibly effective. Vivian knew exactly how to weaponize the deep-seated values of our community. She used the respect for elders, the sanctity of motherhood, and the preservation of Black excellence as weapons against me. By accusing me of violating all three of those sacred pillars, she made me an instant pariah. She wanted me to feel entirely isolated. She wanted me to feel the crushing weight of public shame. She truly believed that if she alienated me from everyone I knew, if she made it impossible for me to show my face in polite society, I would eventually crawl back to her. She thought the threat of losing my reputation would make me beg for forgiveness and offer my bank accounts as a peace offering to restore my good name. She was entirely wrong. I did not care about the opinions of people who could be so easily swayed by a few fake tears. I did not care about my standing in a social circle built on hypocrisy and leased luxury cars. But I did care about the threat she made regarding my daughter. And I cared about setting the record completely straight. As the Sunday morning stretched into the early afternoon, the secondary phase of my mother's plan began. The flying monkeys were unleashed. My phone started ringing with calls from judgmental aunts, distant cousins, and family friends who felt entitled to lecture me based on my mother's tearful performance. They were leaving voicemails dripping with disappointment, demanding that I apologize to my parents and return the money I had supposedly stolen. They were calling me a disgrace to the family name. I sat at my kitchen island listening to the voicemails one by one, deleting them with calm precision. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost 1 in the afternoon. I knew exactly where my mother was. After every Sunday service, Vivian hosted a lavish catered luncheon in the church's grand community hall for the elder board and the most prominent families in the congregation. It was her favorite weekly event, a place where she could hold court, accept sympathy, and bask in the attention of her peers. She would be standing right in the center of the room, surrounded by her supporters playing the tragic heroine. I stood up from the kitchen stool. I walked into my bedroom and opened my closet. I bypassed the casual weekend clothes and pulled out a stunning, perfectly tailored white designer suit. If my mother wanted to make this a public spectacle, I was going to give the congregation a show they would never forget. I was not going to argue with her. I was not going to yell. I was just going to bring the receipts. I grabbed my car keys and a small encrypted flash drive from my home office safe. It was time to go to church. I stepped out of my front door into the bright Sunday afternoon, the crisp white fabric of my tailored designer suit moving flawlessly with every step. The engine of my luxury sedan purred to life as I pressed the ignition. As I navigated the winding roads of my gated community heading toward the city, I decided to listen to the rest of the voicemails pouring into my phone. I needed to hear exactly what my mother had unleashed. I tapped the screen on my dashboard, and the car speakers filled with the self-righteous, judgmental voices of my extended family. They were the flying monkeys, the loyal foot soldiers of my mother's social empire, ready to attack on her command, without ever bothering to ask for a single piece of the truth. First was Auntie Beatrice, my mother's older sister. Her voice was trembling with manufactured outrage. Jada, I am absolutely disgusted by your behavior, she scolded, her tone dripping with the kind of holy judgment usually reserved for violent criminals. To treat your mother this way, after everything she has done for you, is a terrible sin. You are a complete disgrace to this family. You need to get down on your knees and ask the Lord for forgiveness. And then you need to turn those accounts back on before you completely destroy your parents. Do not bother calling me back until you have found your sanity. Next was my cousin Malik. He had not spoken to me in 4 years, not since I refused to give him a $50,000 loan for a failed restaurant venture. Now he suddenly cared deeply about family unity. Jada, you are completely out of line, he stated, trying to sound intimidating. You cannot just steal the family trust fund because you are jealous of Kendra. We all know you have always been bitter, but this is a new low. Fix this or you are going to find yourself completely cut off from the entire community. Message after message played through the speakers. A chorus of aunts, uncles, and distant cousins calling me unstable, vindictive, and cruel. They regurgitated my mother's podcast lies with terrifying accuracy. They genuinely believed I was a rogue, unhinged daughter, attempting to ruin a beautiful legacy out of pure spite. 10 years ago, these messages would have completely broken me. I would have internalized their disappointment and rushed to apologize just to regain their conditional love. But today, their words just sounded like empty, pathetic noise. They were vigorously defending a castle that had already burned to the ground. I stopped at a red light just a few miles from the church. My phone chimed with a different kind of notification. It was a direct message from a college friend who still followed my sister on social media. She had sent me a link with a simple caption that read, "You need to see this right now." I tapped the link and my screen loaded a crowdfunding webpage. I actually let out a genuine loud laugh in the empty car. It was a GoFundMe campaign created by Kendra just an hour ago. The title of the campaign was printed in bold, dramatic letters. "Save our family legacy from a bitter sibling." I read the description she had typed out. It was a masterpiece of absolute delusion. Kendra had written a sprawling emotional essay begging the community for financial support. She claimed that her highly successful luxury lifestyle brand was under a malicious attack. She told the public that I had frozen the family trust fund illegally, locking her out of the generational wealth that was rightfully hers. She painted herself as the innocent victim of a jealous sister who wanted to see her fail. "We are asking for your support to help us cover our operating costs and legal fees while we fight to get our legacy back," Kendra wrote. "Any donation, big or small, will help us keep our employees paid and our dream alive. Please help us stand up against financial abuse." I looked at the campaign goal. She was asking for $500,000. Then I looked at the total amount raised so far. It was exactly $45, likely donated by Auntie Beatrice. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Kendra was sitting in a designer dress, living in a house she could not afford, begging strangers on the internet to fund a company that did not actually produce anything of value. She was trying to weaponize the community's sympathy to replace the allowance I had just cut off. She thought public pressure would eventually force me into a settlement. She had absolutely no idea that I already owned the liquidation firm, preparing to seize her remaining assets. The traffic light turned green. I set the phone down and accelerated down the avenue. The social pressure they were attempting to mount was incredibly heavy, but it was built on a foundation of complete lies. I did not feel the anxiety they desperately wanted me to feel. I felt the precise, cold energy of an executioner walking up to the block. I pulled into the massive, crowded parking lot of the historic community church. The lot was filled with the expensive luxury sedans and imported sports utility vehicles that our congregation loved to show off. I found a parking space near the back, turned off the engine, and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked completely impeccable. The tailored white designer suit I had chosen was not an accident. White was the color of absolute clarity, of truth, and of unapologetic power. It was a stark, intentional contrast to the modest morning black my mother was undoubtedly wearing to play her victim role. My hair was styled flawlessly. My makeup was sharp and precise. I did not look like a woman having a mental breakdown. I looked like a chief executive officer preparing to execute a hostile takeover of a room. I grabbed my purse, making sure the encrypted flash drive was securely tucked into the side pocket. I stepped out of the car, the warm afternoon sun shining down on me. I could see the grand double doors of the community hall at the far end of the courtyard. Dozens of church members were lingering outside, chatting in their Sunday best. As I walked across the courtyard, the conversations began to completely stop. Heads turned in my direction. Whispers immediately broke out among the crowd. People nudged each other, pointing subtly in my direction. They had all heard my mother's tearful prayer request. They had all listened to the podcast. They expected me to be hiding in shame, or perhaps they expected me to arrive looking erratic and unstable. Instead, I walked through the courtyard with my head held high, my posture perfectly straight, my heels clicking rhythmically against the stone pavement. I offered polite, calm smiles to the people staring at me, refusing to break eye contact when they looked my way. I watched as several of Vivian's loyal friends literally took a step back, parting like the Red Sea to let me pass. They were intimidated by the sheer confidence I was radiating. I reached the heavy wooden doors of the community hall. I could hear the loud hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware coming from inside. The weekly post-service luncheon was in full swing. This was my mother's absolute favorite stage. She was inside that room right now, soaking up the sympathy and adoration of the elite families, completely convinced she had successfully destroyed my reputation. I placed my hand on the brass handle of the door. The flying monkeys had taken their shots. Kendra had made her pathetic plea for internet charity. They had done everything in their power to push me into a corner and turn my own community against me. Now it was my turn to speak. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped directly into the lion's den. The heavy wooden doors of the community hall yielded to my push opening with a deep creak that instantly cut through the low hum of conversation. The room was massive, featuring vaulted ceilings and tall windows that cast long beams of Sunday afternoon sunlight across the polished hardwood floors. Dozens of round tables were covered in crisp white linens and expensive floral centerpieces. This was the exclusive post-service luncheon, the inner sanctum of our church's high society. As I stepped over the threshold, the clinking of silverware against fine china completely stopped. The lively chatter died in the air, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. Every single head in the room turned to face the entrance. I recognized the faces of the aunts, the cousins, and the family friends who had spent their morning leaving vicious voicemails on my phone. Their expressions shifted rapidly, from shock to harsh, judgmental glaring. I stood tall in my flawless white designer suit, holding my designer purse with relaxed, steady hands. I did not look like a woman who was mentally unstable or crippled by social shame. I looked entirely in control. My eyes scanned the massive room until I found my target. Vivian was holding court near the center of the hall, standing beside a long buffet table draped in ivory silk. She was wearing a modest, high-necked black dress, surrounded by a tight circle of the church's elder board and the most prominent wealthy women in the congregation. She had a lace handkerchief clutched in her hand, actively dabbing at her dry eyes. When she saw me standing in the doorway, the manufactured sorrow on her face instantly vanished. Her jaw tightened and her eyes flashed with a potent mixture of panic and intense rage. She had not expected me to show up. She had expected me to hide. "Jada, what on earth are you doing here?" Vivian called out, her voice loud enough for the entire hall to hear. She quickly adjusted her tone, trying to slip back into the role of the terrified, grieving mother. "You are not welcome here. This is a safe space for our family to heal from the trauma you have caused. Please leave before you make another scene. I do not want to see you suffer another mental episode in front of the congregation." She gestured frantically to a pair of tall, broad-shouldered ushers standing near the front of the room. "Please, Brother Thomas." Vivian pleaded, looking at the head usher with wide, frightened eyes. "My daughter is not well. She needs to be escorted out before she hurts someone or herself." The two men in dark suits stepped forward, moving purposefully in my direction. I did not retreat. I simply reached into my purse and pulled out the small encrypted flash drive. I held it up between my fingers. I looked directly at the head usher as he approached me. "Brother Thomas." I said, my voice completely calm and perfectly projected so that it carried across the silent room. "If you lay a single hand on me, I will have my corporate legal team file assault charges against you and civil litigation against the church board by Monday morning. I am a baptized member of this congregation, and I have every legal right to be in this building. Step aside." Brother Thomas froze. He looked at me, taking in my cold, unyielding expression and the sheer authority radiating from my posture. He was a sensible man who volunteered his time on Sundays. He had absolutely no desire to tangle with a billionaire chief executive over a family dispute. He slowly lowered his hands and took a deliberate step back, clearing my path. His partner immediately followed suit. Vivian's face drained of color. She realized in that exact moment that her social influence could not override my absolute power. I walked past the ushers, ignoring the gasps and murmurs from the crowd. I did not walk toward my mother. I walked directly toward the raised stage at the front of the hall. The church had a massive state-of-the-art audiovisual system used for community presentations and guest speakers. A sleek digital podium sat in the center of the stage, connected to a giant projector screen mounted high on the back wall. "What are you doing?" Vivian demanded, abandoning her gentle victim voice. Her tone was sharp and frantic as she pushed her way through her circle of supporters. "Get away from there! Turn the system off! Somebody stop her!" Nobody moved. The entire room was paralyzed by the sheer, undeniable tension. I stepped up to the podium, tapped the control screen to wake the system, and inserted my flash drive into the primary port. I navigated the menu with swift, practiced precision. I found the file I was looking for, a high-resolution scanned document, and pressed the command to display it. Behind Vivian, the massive projector hummed to life. The giant white screen dropped down from the ceiling, illuminating the entire front of the hall with a blindingly bright image. A collective audible gasp echoed through the room as the congregation stared at the 20-foot-tall document glowing on the wall. I stepped up to the microphone on the podium. I did not yell. I spoke with the calm, devastating clarity of a judge reading a final verdict. "My mother stood before you all this morning and asked for your prayers." I began, my voice ringing cleanly through the massive speakers. "She told you that I was financially abusing my family. She told you that I had stolen their generational wealth in a fit of paranoid delusion. She weaponized your faith and your sympathy to destroy my reputation. So I decided it was only fair to come here today and show you exactly what financial abuse looks like." I pressed a button on the podium, zooming in on the top half of the projected document. It was a formal, heavily stamped commercial banking application. "This is a commercial loan application from 15 years ago," I explained, looking out at the sea of shocked faces. "The loan was for $250,000. It was the exact amount of seed money used to fund my sister Kendra's very first luxury boutique, a business that failed completely within 12 months. My mother has always bragged about how she and my father personally funded Kendra's dreams out of their own pockets to support Black excellence. But if you look at the applicant information, you will see a different story." I pressed the button again, panning the image down to the personal details section. The congregation fell dead silent. Whispers completely ceased. Auntie Beatrice, who had left me that vicious voicemail, dropped her fork onto her porcelain plate with a loud clatter. "The primary applicant on this massive loan was not Vivian," I stated, enunciating every word. "The applicant was me. I was 20 years old. I was a junior in college, working night shifts at a warehouse just to pay for my textbooks. I had no idea this loan existed." I zoomed in on the bottom of the page, focusing entirely on the signature line. The name signed on the document was mine, but the handwriting was undeniably distinctly Vivian's flowing cursive script. "My mother stole my social security number," I told the room, my voice steady, despite the heavy gravity of the revelation. "She committed identity theft and forged my signature to secure $250,000 in debt. She handed that money to her golden child. And when Kendra's business inevitably went bankrupt, Vivian simply let the loan default." I looked directly at Vivian. She was standing frozen in the middle of the floor. The elder board members who had been comforting her just moments ago were now physically stepping away from her, their faces twisting in absolute disgust. Do you know what happens to a 20-year-old girl when a massive commercial loan defaults in her name? I asked the crowd, my tone dropping into a visceral, haunting quiet. Her credit score drops into the low 400s. When I graduated and tried to lease my first tiny apartment, I was denied. When I tried to buy a used delivery van to start my own logistics company, the bank manager laughed me out of his office. I spent years living in unheated warehouses, eating cheap noodles, and fighting a mountain of financial ruin that I could not understand. And all the while I sat at Sunday dinners listening to my mother praise Kendra for her brilliant entrepreneurial spirit. Vivian finally found her voice. It was a shrill, desperate shriek. "It is a lie," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "That document is doctored. She is making this up to ruin me. And even if it were true, that was 15 years ago. The statute of limitations has passed. You cannot do anything about it." Her frantic defense was a complete admission of guilt. The entire congregation heard it. By trying to claim the legal time limit had expired, she confirmed that she had committed the crime. The flying monkeys who had attacked me all morning were now staring at Vivian with sheer horror. I smiled. It was a cold, absolute smile that offered no mercy. "You are right about one thing, Vivian. It was 15 years ago," I replied, my voice echoing through the silent hall. "But the federal statute of limitations for aggravated identity theft and wire fraud does not begin on the date the crime was committed. The clock begins on the date the fraud is formally discovered by the victim. I only uncovered these documents during a forensic audit of your failing estate 3 days ago. The clock just started ticking. I reached over and pulled the flash drive out of the podium. The massive screen behind her instantly went black, plunging the front of the room back into natural light. "You tried to use this church to destroy my character," I announced, looking out over the stunned congregation one last time. "You tried to use my community against me, but you forgot that I am the one who always handles the logistics. I do not just bring accusations, I bring the receipts." I stepped down from the stage and began walking back down the center aisle toward the heavy wooden doors. "And Vivian," I added, pausing just for a second without turning around, "I did not just bring the receipts here today. I handed the unredacted files over to the federal authorities this morning. I suggest you skip the dessert line and call a criminal defense attorney." I pushed the doors open and walked out into the warm Sunday sunlight, leaving my mother entirely trapped in the suffocating silence of her own absolute ruin. The fallout from the church luncheon was absolute and immediate. By Monday morning, the very same social circle that had rushed to condemn me was now completely unified in their absolute disgust for my mother. The news of the forged commercial loans spread through the affluent community faster than a wildfire. Vivian had spent decades carefully curating an image of flawless morality and superior Black excellence, and in less than 10 minutes I had reduced it to ash. She was instantly excommunicated. The elder board asked her to step down from all her charitable committees. Her country club friends stopped returning her phone calls. She locked herself inside the master bedroom of the foreclosed estate, refusing to come out, entirely consumed by the crushing weight of her public humiliation and the looming threat of a federal indictment. But I knew my family better than they knew themselves. I knew that in the face of absolute destruction, their supposed loyalty to one another would evaporate instantly. They were not a family bound by love. They were a syndicate, bound by convenience, and funded by my silent charity. And now that the money was gone, and the authorities were circling, the instinct for raw self-preservation kicked in. Sitting in my glass corner office high above the city, I watched their entire escape plan unfold in real time. Because I had funded Kendra's lifestyle brand for over a decade, through the proxy trust, my corporate technology department still possessed administrative access to their company email servers. I did not even have to hire private investigators to see what they were doing. They were frantically typing out their own confessions on devices I had paid for. I sat at my obsidian desk sipping sparkling water, watching the desperate emails fly back and forth between my father, my sister, and the few shady business contacts they had left. Roland and Kendra were not discussing how to hire a criminal defense attorney to save Vivian. They were not strategizing on how to pack up the estate before the 30-day eviction notice expired. They were actively plotting to abandon her completely. My father was a man who valued his own comfort above all else. He looked at his wife, a woman facing federal wire fraud charges, and decided she was dead weight. Kendra, the golden child who had spent her entire life hiding behind her mother's skirts, realized that Vivian's social currency was officially bankrupt. There was no more protection to be found in that house. And Trent, having been spectacularly fired from his executive job just days prior, was simply following Kendra around like a defeated, panicked shadow, desperate for any lifeline that would keep him in luxury suits. I read an email Roland sent to a contact in the commercial restructuring sector. He was trying to quietly arrange a fire sale. Kendra's luxury lifestyle brand was heavily in debt and entirely insolvent without my proxy trust to cover the payroll. However, the company still technically held a few paper assets. They had a massive database of wealthy client email addresses, the trademark rights to their pretentious brand name, and a warehouse full of unsold, overpriced scented candles and woven baskets. Roland knew the company was going to formally collapse by the end of the week, but he also knew that if he moved fast enough, he could sell the hollow shell of the brand to a corporate liquidator before the federal investigators or the creditors could freeze their remaining accounts. The liquidator they contacted was a firm known for buying distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. Roland negotiated a desperate, rushed deal. The liquidator offered $200,000 in cash for the complete transfer of all intellectual property, physical inventory, and customer data. It was an incredibly insulting fraction of what Kendra always claimed her empire was worth, but to a family staring down the barrel of homelessness and prison time, it was a golden ticket. The emails revealed the darkest, most satisfying part of their scheme. The $200,000 was not going to be used to pay off the fraudulent loan. It was not going to be used to secure legal counsel for my mother. It was going to be used to flee. Kendra and Trent had already signed a digital lease for a luxury condominium in Atlanta. They planned to take the liquidation cash pack, their designer bags, and drive south under the cover of darkness. They were going to start over in a new city, infiltrating a new social scene, completely leaving Vivian behind, to face the FBI, the massive debt, and the impending eviction entirely alone. They were throwing the woman who had orchestrated my abuse to the wolves, simply because she was no longer useful to them. There is truly no honor among thieves. I leaned back in my leather executive chair, feeling a profound sense of poetic justice. Vivian had destroyed my credit to fund Kendra's dreams, and now Kendra was stealing the last remaining scraps of wealth to leave Vivian to rot. The cycle of toxicity was finally eating itself alive. According to the final email exchange on my monitor, the closing signatures for the liquidation sale were scheduled for Tuesday afternoon. Roland, Kendra, and Trent were instructed to meet the anonymous buyer at a neutral location to sign the final transfer deeds and collect the wired funds. They chose a rented boardroom in a sterile, high-rise corporate building downtown, far away from the prying eyes of our social circle and far away from my logistics headquarters. They thought they were being incredibly stealthy. They thought they had found a secret loophole to escape the ruin I had orchestrated. I checked the security camera feeds on the exterior of my parents' foreclosed estate. The cameras, which technically belonged to my shell corporation, showed exactly what the emails had promised. On Tuesday morning, while Vivian was presumably still crying in her bedroom, Trent and Roland were hurriedly loading heavy designer suitcases into the trunk of a rented black sport utility vehicle parked in the driveway. Trent looked haggard, wearing a wrinkled dress shirt without a tie, nervously glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. Kendra walked out of the front door, wearing dark, oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, trying to disguise herself from any neighbors who might be watching. She did not even look back at the house. She just climbed into the passenger seat and slammed the door shut. They were sneaking out of their own lives like common criminals. They left the estate and merged onto the highway, heading straight for the downtown financial district to execute their secret sale. They believed that once those papers were signed, they would be free from the crushing gravity of my revenge. They thought the $200,000 would be their salvation, I closed the email server window on my computer. I stood up, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window of my office, and looked out over the sprawling city. I could see the exact high-rise building where they were heading to sign the documents. I smiled, feeling the thrill of the final checkmate approaching. They did not know that the corporate liquidation firm they had so desperately contacted was just another holding company buried deep within the massive portfolio of Apex Logistics. They did not know that the anonymous buyer they were rushing to meet was not a stranger looking for a cheap deal. They thought they were running away from me, but every single exit door they tried to open led directly back into my kingdom. I pressed the intercom button on my desk, calling my chief legal officer. Olivia, the rats have officially left the ship. They are on their way to the downtown boardroom right now. Please have the acquisition papers prepared and ready for my signature. Tell my driver to bring the car around to the front lobby. I am going to go purchase a lifestyle brand today. I grabbed my suit jacket from the back of my chair and headed for the elevator. They were sitting in that room right now, holding their breath, waiting for their escape hatch to open. They had absolutely no idea I was about to walk through the door and weld it shut forever. The drive from my corporate headquarters to the downtown financial district took exactly 14 minutes. I sat in the back of my chauffeured town car, watching the city skyline pass by through the tinted windows. The afternoon sun was reflecting off the massive glass skyscrapers, casting long, sharp shadows across the pavement. I felt an incredible sense of calm. For 35 years, my family had treated me like a minor, easily manageable inconvenience. They had built an entire false reality around my silence, convincing themselves that their unearned privilege made them untouchable. Today, that reality was going to formally cease to exist. My car pulled up to the curb of a towering, sterile high-rise building, made entirely of black steel and reflective glass. It was a building known for housing aggressive corporate restructuring firms, bankruptcy attorneys, and venture capitalists who specialized in picking the meat off the bones of dying companies. It was the perfect graveyard for Kendra's failing lifestyle brand. I stepped out of the car, flanked by Olivia, my chief legal officer, who carried the thick leather portfolio containing the final acquisition documents. We walked through the revolving doors and crossed the expansive marble lobby without speaking a single word. The receptionist at the front desk immediately recognized me, offering a polite nod before directing us to the private executive elevators reserved for senior partners. We rode the elevator up to the 47th floor. The doors opened to a quiet, dimly lit corridor lined with private, soundproof boardrooms. These rooms were specifically designed for high-stakes negotiations, corporate liquidations, and the quiet dismantling of failed empires. Olivia led me to boardroom number 4. But instead of walking directly through the main doors, I placed a hand on her arm, signaling her to stop. I gestured toward the small, adjoining observation room that shared a wall with the main boardroom. The wall between the two rooms was made entirely of one-way privacy glass, allowing anyone in the observation room to see and hear everything happening inside the boardroom without being detected. Because my holding company owned the firm that managed this floor, I had full access to the viewing suite. I stepped into the dark observation room and looked through the glass. The scene unfolding on the other side was a masterpiece of absolute desperation. My father, Roland, was pacing back and forth across the length of the long mahogany conference table. He was wearing a gray suit, but the jacket was unbuttoned, and his usually perfect posture was completely gone. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped under the invisible weight of his impending ruin. He kept checking his expensive gold watch, tapping the crystal face with a trembling finger. Trent was sitting in one of the plush leather chairs, and he looked entirely unraveled. The arrogant, condescending white corporate finance brother who had stormed into my office just days ago was nowhere to be found. He was sweating profusely, his face flushed and shining under the harsh fluorescent lights of the boardroom. He had taken off his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing dark sweat stains under his arms. He kept running his hands through his thinning hair, his leg bouncing nervously against the leg of the table. He looked like a man who knew he was standing on the edge of a cliff, just waiting for the wind to blow. Kendra was sitting next to Trent, and her frantic energy was palpable even through the soundproof glass. She was aggressively chewing on her thumbnail, a nervous habit she had not displayed since we were children. She was wearing a massive pair of dark designer sunglasses indoors, trying to hide her swollen, sleep-deprived eyes. Her phone was resting on the table in front of her, and she kept picking it up, unlocking the screen and locking it again in a rapid, obsessive cycle. I reached out and pressed the audio button on the wall console. The hushed, panicked voices of my family instantly filled the small observation room. "Where is the buyer?" Trent hissed, his voice cracking with anxiety. The email said 1 o'clock sharp. It is 10 minutes past 1. If this deal falls through, Roland, I swear to God I am going to lose my mind. I cannot stay in this city another night. The bank froze my personal checking account this morning. I do not even have enough money to buy gas for the rental car. Calm down, Trent, Roland snapped, though his own voice lacked any real authority. The broker assured me the liquidator was highly motivated. They want the customer database before the company formally declares bankruptcy. They will be here. We just need to get the paper signed, collect the wire transfer confirmation, and walk away. Kendra took off her sunglasses, her eyes wild and bloodshot. $200,000 is not enough, she complained, her entitled delusion still managing to survive the total collapse of her life. My brand is worth millions. My aesthetic is flawless. I cannot believe we are selling my legacy to some faceless corporate scavenger for pennies. It is $200,000 in clean, untraceable cash, Kendra Trent shot back, glaring at his wife. Do you not understand the situation we are in? Your mother committed federal wire fraud. The feds are probably drafting the indictment warrants as we speak. We need that cash to secure the condo in Atlanta and lay low until this entire nightmare blows over. We are taking the money and we are leaving today. Roland stopped pacing and leaned heavily against the conference table. Trent is right. We have to prioritize our own survival. Vivian made her own bed when she forged that document 15 years ago. She was reckless. She let her hatred for Jada cloud her judgment, and now she has to face the consequences alone. I am not going to spend the rest of my life in a federal prison because my wife could not control her vanity. Once the money clears, we go our separate ways. I have a contact in Florida who can help me set up a new consulting firm. I listened to them finalize their cowardly escape plan. It was breathtakingly cold. They were entirely willing to sacrifice my mother to the federal authorities just to save their own skin. They felt absolutely no remorse for the pain they had caused me, and they felt absolutely no loyalty to the woman who had enabled their toxic behavior for decades. They only cared about the money. They were staring at the boardroom doors, praying for their anonymous savior to walk in and hand them the cash that would buy their freedom. I turned off the audio feed. I looked at Olivia, who was watching the scene with an expression of profound professional disgust. She adjusted her glasses and offered me a sharp, ready nod. "It is time to close the deal," I told her softly. We walked out of the observation room and stepped into the quiet corridor. I stopped directly in front of the heavy double doors of boardroom number 4. I took one final deep breath, smoothing down the front of my tailored suit. I did not feel angry. I felt like a surgeon holding a scalpel ready to precisely cut out a massive infection. I reached out, grasped the polished brass handles, and pushed the doors open. The heavy doors swung inward with a loud, dramatic swoosh, instantly sucking the nervous air out of the room. Roland, Kendra, and Trent all snapped their heads toward the entrance at the exact same time. The expressions on their faces morphed from desperate anticipation to sheer, paralyzing horror in a fraction of a second. They froze completely, their bodies rigid as if a ghost had just walked into the room. Jada Roland gasped, the color draining completely from his face. His knees visibly buckled, forcing him to grip the edge of the conference table to stay standing. Trent jumped up from his chair, knocking it backward onto the carpet. "What are you doing here?" he yelled, his voice shrill and panicked. "How did you find us? You cannot be here. We are in the middle of a highly confidential corporate transaction. Get out before I call building security." Kendra just stared at me, her mouth hanging open, entirely incapable of forming a single word. I did not stop walking. I moved past them with deliberate, measured steps, ignoring Trent's pathetic yelling. I walked directly to the head of the long mahogany table, pulled out the heavy leather chair reserved for the senior executive, and sat down. Olivia stepped up right beside me, placing the thick leather portfolio onto the table with a heavy final thud. She opened the folder revealing the freshly printed acquisition contracts. "You cannot stop this sale, Jada." Roland said, his voice trembling as he tried to regain some fraction of his patriarchal authority. "We have every legal right to liquidate this company. You froze the proxy trust, but you do not own Kendra's brand. The buyer is on their way right now, and once those papers are signed, we are entirely done with you." I folded my hands together and placed them on top of the open portfolio. I looked at my father, letting the absolute silence stretch out for a long, agonizing moment. "The buyer is not on their way, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly level and devastatingly calm. "The buyer is already here." They stared at me, their brains struggling to process the words I had just spoken. Trent shook his head, refusing to believe it. "What are you talking about?" Trent stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the documents on the table. "The liquidator is a firm called Vanguard Asset Recovery. I verified their corporate credentials myself." "You verified a shell company, Trent," I corrected him, keeping my eyes locked on his terrified face. "Vanguard Asset Recovery is a wholly owned subsidiary of Apex Logistics. I created it 3 years ago to handle the liquidation of failed supply chain vendors. When you sent that desperate email begging for a fire sale on Friday night, you sent it directly to my acquisitions team." Kendra finally found her voice. It was a high, thin wail of absolute disbelief. "No, no, that is impossible. You cannot be the buyer. We agreed to a $200,000 cash buyout. You are not taking my company. We are leaving. We need that money to go to Atlanta." I reached out and pulled a silver pen from my jacket pocket. I tapped it gently against the acquisition contract. "You are not going to Atlanta, Kendra," I stated cleanly, "and there is no $200,000 wire transfer coming to save you." I turned the thick stack of papers around so they faced my family. I pointed to the itemized financial breakdown on the second page. "When my forensic accountants audited your lifestyle brand over the weekend to prepare for this acquisition, they found a massive glaring liability," I explained, dropping my tone into a cold, clinical register. "According to the federal documents, I uncovered the original $250,000 loan that Vivian fraudulently acquired in my name was completely defaulted on. That means the debt, along with 15 years of compounding penalties and aggressive interest, was still legally attached to the initial capital used to found this company." Roland began to wheeze, his hand clutching his chest as the reality of the math began to crush him. "Because the seed money was stolen from me," I continued, my voice echoing off the glass walls of the boardroom. "My corporate legal team filed an emergency lien against every single asset, trademark, and physical piece of inventory your company possesses. The total amount of the lien far exceeds the $200,000 valuation you desperately agreed to." I looked at Trent, who was now leaning against the wall, sliding slowly down until he hit the floor, completely defeated. "Your equity is exactly 0. I told them, delivering the final fatal blow to their escape plan. "Vanguard Asset Recovery is not buying your company to give you a cash parachute. We are acquiring your company to settle the massive fraudulent debt you owe me. By signing these liquidation papers today, you are simply surrendering your entire legacy to avoid further civil prosecution. You walk away with absolutely nothing: no cash, no brand, no escape fund." Kendra collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands and sobbing uncontrollably. The golden child was finally broken. Her entire identity, funded by my abuse and built on my money, was officially gone. Roland stood frozen, staring blankly at the wall, a ruined man who had just lost his family, his fortune, and his freedom, all in the span of a single weekend. I picked up the silver pen. I leaned forward and signed my name on the bottom line of the master acquisition document with a fluid, flawless stroke. I capped the pen and placed it carefully back into my pocket. I stood up from the head of the table, looking down at the 3 people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. "You wanted Zuri and me away from your table," I asked, my voice ringing with absolute chilling finality. "Done. You no longer have a table." I turned my back on them and walked out of the boardroom, leaving the heavy doors open behind me. stepping out into a future that belonged entirely to me. The weeks that followed that boardroom meeting felt like watching a perfectly constructed house of cards collapse in slow motion. Once the absolute reality of their financial destruction set in the fragile bonds that held my family together completely disintegrated. They had spent their entire lives pretending to be a unified front of superior black excellence, but without my money acting as the glue, they turned on each other with a vicious, desperate speed. Trent was the first to run. Without his lucrative executive position, his country club memberships, and the endless stream of proxy trust cash to fund his lavish lifestyle, his marriage to Kendra instantly lost its appeal. I received word through my legal team that he had quietly packed his designer suits into the trunk of his leased sports car while Kendra was sleeping and simply drove away. He left her with nothing but a mountain of credit card debt and a stack of unpaid utility bills. Kendra, the golden child who had spent 32 years floating on a cloud of unearned privilege, hit the ground harder than anyone. Her luxury lifestyle brand was formally absorbed into my liquidation firm to satisfy her fraudulent debts. With no husband to bankroll her and no parents to run to, she was finally forced to enter the real world. A former colleague of mine mentioned seeing her a few weeks later. Kendra had taken a minimum wage retail job at a high-end department store she used to frequent. She was spending 8 hours a day on her feet folding the exact same designer clothes she could no longer afford to buy, forced to smile and serve the very same wealthy socialites who used to attend her lavish parties. The absolute humiliation of serving her former peers was a far harsher punishment than anything I could have ever designed. My parents fared even worse. When the 30-day eviction notice finally expired, they were forcibly removed from the sprawling estate I owned. The local sheriff arrived to oversee the process, ensuring they did not try to take any of the custom fixtures or high-end appliances that legally belonged to my shell corporation. They were forced to downsize into a tiny, cramped two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Their new home had thin walls, stained carpets, and absolutely no room for the massive, pretentious oil paintings and imported furniture they had hoarded over the years. They were completely cut off. Their country club memberships were revoked for non-payment. Their wealthy friends stopped returning their calls, treating them like social pariahs after the church scandal. Vivian rarely left the apartment, entirely consumed by the terrifying looming reality of the federal investigation I had initiated. Her days of hosting elegant luncheons and judging the community from her high horse were permanently over. But my mother was not one to accept defeat gracefully. A few months after the eviction, on a dreary, overcast Tuesday afternoon, my estate security system chimed. I was sitting in my home office reviewing international shipping manifests when the live camera feed popped up on my wall monitor. Vivian was standing outside the heavy iron gates of my driveway. She looked completely unrecognizable. She was wearing a plain, slightly wrinkled raincoat, her hair pulled back into a messy knot. She was shivering in the damp air, staring up at the security camera with wide, desperate eyes. She pressed the intercom button. "Jada, please," Vivian begged, her voice crackling through the external speaker. Her tears were entirely real this time. There was no audience, no congregation to manipulate, just a broken woman standing in the rain. "Please let me in. I just want to talk to you. I want to see Zuri. She is my only granddaughter. You cannot just erase me from her life. I am your mother. We are family." I pressed the microphone button on my desk console. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel anger. I just felt a profound, impenetrable calm. "You ceased being my mother the day you stole my identity to fund your own vanity," I replied, my voice echoing coldly out into the damp street. "And you ceased being Zura's grandmother the night you grabbed her arm and banished her to the shadows because she did not fit your aesthetic." "Jada, I am so sorry," Vivian sobbed, gripping the iron bars of the gate. "I made a mistake. I was terrified of losing everything. I am terrified right now. Please just open the gate. Do not leave me out here like this." "You are not sorry for what you did, Vivian," I stated flatly. "You are only sorry that you finally got caught. You are sorry that the money stopped. You built a kingdom on my back and now you have to live in the ruins. Do not ever come to my home again. If you do not leave my property in the next 30 seconds, my security detail will physically remove you and I will file a restraining order. I took my finger off the button cutting the microphone feed. I watched the monitor as Vivian stood there for a few more agonizing seconds, her shoulders shaking with heavy sobs, before she finally turned around and walked slowly down the sidewalk, disappearing into the gray afternoon. The boundary was set. It was locked, reinforced, and completely unbreakable. The gray skies eventually cleared, making way for a brilliant sun-drenched Saturday a few weeks later. The air was warm and sweet, completely free of the toxic tension that had suffocated me for my entire adult life. It was Zura's 8th birthday, and my sprawling backyard had been transformed into a massive, vibrant wonderland. There were no stuffy, pretentious jazz bands. There were no rented centerpieces, no leased luxury cars, and absolutely no fake smiles. Instead, the air was filled with the loud, booming bass of a live DJ playing upbeat music, the smell of genuine Southern barbecue smoking on a massive grill, and the uncontrollable laughter of dozens of children running across the manicured lawn. I had invited all of Zura's school friends, their parents, my loyal colleagues from the logistics firm, and the chosen family who had supported me through the hardest years of my life. Zuri was the absolute star of the day. She was not forced to wear anything muted or uncomfortable to please a magazine photographer. She had picked out a loud, sparkling neon pink dress that shimmered brightly in the sunlight. Her natural hair was styled into two massive, beautiful puffs, decorated with bright pink ribbons. She was sitting at the very head of a long, colorful picnic table surrounded by her friends, tearing into wrapping paper and laughing so hard her whole body shook. She was radiant, entirely secure in the knowledge that she was the most important person in the world to me. I stood on the edge of the stone patio, holding a glass of sweet tea, taking in the spectacular view. I watched my chief legal officer, Olivia, happily kicking a soccer ball with a group of kids. I saw my assistant, Sarah, laughing loudly at a joke someone told by the grill. This was my table now. Everyone who sat at it was invited because of love, mutual respect, and genuine connection. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen and opened my secure banking application one last time. I did not open it to check on a proxy trust or to monitor the failing accounts of a toxic family. I opened it simply to look at my own massive, incredibly secure balance. The logistics empire I had built with my late husband was thriving, expanding into new global markets every single day. The wealth was entirely mine, protected by ironclad legal structures and earned through unrelenting hard work. I closed the banking app and opened my contacts list. I scrolled down to my mother's name. I swiped left and pressed delete. I scrolled to my father's name. Delete, Kendra, delete, Trent, delete. I completely erased their numbers, their addresses, and their digital footprints from my device. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, feeling lighter than I had ever felt in my 35 years of life. The heavy, suffocating chain of generational trauma was completely shattered. The cycle of emotional abuse and financial exploitation was permanently broken. I walked down the patio steps and stepped onto the warm grass, making my way toward the head of the table, where my daughter was holding up a new toy and beaming with absolute joy. I smiled a genuine deep smile that reached all the way to my soul. The shadow was gone. I was finally standing in the sun, and the legacy was entirely ours. Looking back, the greatest lesson I learned is that sharing a bloodline does not give anyone the right to abuse you. For years, I allowed my family to drain me financially and emotionally because I confused toxic obligation with love. I thought shrinking myself would eventually earn their respect, but I was entirely wrong. True family is defined by mutual respect, unwavering support, and the choice to truly value one another. Walking away from my parents and sister was not an act of cruelty. It was profound self-preservation. I had to let their fake empire fall so my daughter and I could finally thrive in the sun. If you have ever had to set hard boundaries to protect your own peace, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your story in the comments below.